In this video, we're going to talk a little bit about the advantages of using functions in Python, and we're also going to do a quick review about the information from this lecture series. So we can think of a function as a black box. And as a programmer, that black box gives you a lot of advantages. The biggest advantage is that you don't need to understand all the inner workings of how that black box performs some kind of function. Instead, you just need to know what kind of information the function requires, what's the input that it requires, and remember, those are called the arguments, and then what kind of response to expect, whether or not there's a return value that you need to capture. And if you know those two bits of information, then you can call the function and use that tool in your code without knowing anything about the underlying algorithm that's written to make that function carry out a particular activity. So functions promote the idea of abstraction. That's a fancy computer science word that just means the idea that you can use something without understanding it. That allows us to free up our brain cells so that we can do more sophisticated problem solving, so that we don't have to think about all the low-lying underlying details of something. We can focus more on the problem that we're trying to solve. We use the idea of abstraction every day. For example, I have absolutely no idea how a microwave oven works. I mean, I know it heats up stuff and I know what buttons to press, but I don't understand the physics or the electronics of how all of that happens. But I know that if I want to make popcorn, that's a particular function that I want to perform, I can put my bag of popcorn into the microwave and press the popcorn button. That's like the input that's required from me. It requires me to place the item in the microwave and then press the button. And then the microwave does its thing. It carries out the algorithm. It makes me a snack. And so I know the expected output. I should open up the microwave and take my snack out. If I don't do either of those pieces right, if I don't put the right input in, if I don't press the correct button, or if I don't retrieve my snack, then the microwave hasn't really lived up to its potential for me. But in order for me to use the microwave, as long as I provide the right input and I get the output from it, then it performs as a tool for me. It does something that I want it to do. And I don't have to understand all the internal details. I just need to know, what do I need to provide and what's the response that comes back. The same thing's true when we're using Python functions. When we were using something like the print function or the input function, we didn't need to know how does that happen behind the scenes. We just need to know, what data do I need to provide and what kind of output should I expect from this particular function. So let's review a little bit of the information we've been talking about. So when we pass information into the function, we have a special name for that. What do we call those items that we pass into the function? They're the arguments. We also can get information back from the function to the main program where we make the function call, and those are called the function's return value. So those are two key vocabulary words. You want to make sure you have those down so that when you're reading a lab or a programming project description or something like that, and it tells you to either use a function or create a function, and asks you to use particular arguments or a particular return value, you understand what it's asking for. Now let's practice making a couple function calls. Suppose I want to call a function called calculate this. And the function is set up so that it requires two different arguments that represent integer values that need to be the operands for some math calculation we're doing. And then the function does all the magic of the math calculation. We don't really need to worry about what it does. And then it returns a value, the result of the calculation. What would a valid call to the calculate this function look like? So think about, what are its arguments and does it have a return value? Well, this particular function does have a return value. It tells us it's going to return the result of the calculation. So I'm going to save that in a variable like result. And then I need to put in equals and then the name of the function I'm calling, which is called calculate this. And then we wanted it to take 2 arguments that were integers as parameters. I'm going to call them like value 1 and value 2. So our function call to the calculate this function would look something like this. Result equals calculate this, value 1, value 2. And finally, suppose I want to call a function called print this, and the function requires 3 arguments representing strings to display to the screen. The function doesn't make any calculations or return any value. What would a valid function call to the print this function look like? So again, think about the return value, think about the arguments, think about the function name. So this function doesn't have a return value, so we don't need the left-hand part of the function call. We just need to start with the name of the function, which is print this. And then this one takes 3 arguments that represent strings to display. I'm going to type in string 1, string 2, string 3. You could have put string literals in there too if you wanted to put something like hello as a string literal. That would be just fine as well. As long as you get 3 arguments in there and you don't have a return value, then you have a valid function call for the print this function.